Why is science writing important and what role does it play in society? Hi, I'm Jesse, and I help scientists communicate their research more effectively by teaching them lessons in scientific writing and scientific marketing. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the importance and role of scientific writing in today's society. There are 5 main roles that science writing plays: education, information, persuasion, inspiration, and entertainment. I'm going to get into each of these, but first I want to cover a little bit of definitions. So what is science writing to begin with? I define this as any writing that is covering scientific topics. So it could be either written or scripted work, and anything like that, counts. In this particular video, I'm going to be talking about science writing that's meant for the public audience. That's to be, aside from academic science writing, which is, different in some ways. You also hear sometimes referred to as scientific writing, as that academic work that is articles that are written for researchers by other researchers. And while that's also very important in its own right, it is separate from what we're talking about here. And I just wanted to clarify that because those definitions are very clearly easily to confuse. Let's start with education. Science writing at its base, the original function was to share scientific information with new generations of scientists. Of course, all of that content that you're consuming from kindergarten all the way up to university needs to be written by somebody. We often don't think of it as being written by anybody, but it is at the end of the day. Science textbooks are clearly the most obvious example of this that is quite iconic. Once again, we don't really think about this as having an author necessarily, but it does, and the writing is actually quite difficult too, because you kind of have to do it as a committee, or so often a large group that's working on things together, and in addition you're trying to make it as interesting and engaging as possible while still teaching whatever is necessary in the curriculum. There's tons of other content for students as well that's written, like assignments and reference books, etc. Also, YouTube has become an incredible source of science educational content. You can learn about any scientific content that you basically could imagine on YouTube these days, which is really amazing that there's so many great resources out there now. What about adults, though? Everything I've talked about so far is for students in schools. Is there stuff like this for adults? Absolutely. There's actually tons out there these days. How-to guides, explainer articles, documentaries. These are all great for teaching you new skills or to explain curiosities or any of these questions that you might have. And I think the content that's getting out there these days is very, very high quality, and there's just tons of it around. Information is up next. There is a lot happening in the world of technology and science these days. Unfortunately, in some cases, there's been so much going on. But whether it's new medical treatments or astronomical discoveries, advances in environmental sustainability, we all deserve to know about this. I think the role of informational science writing can be kind of broken into 3 different categories. Explanation as to what exactly happened, essentially. Then there's contextualization, so why does whatever happen matter? Does it what cause a problem? Does it solve a problem? For example. And then amplification, so drawing attention to questions and to topics that people might not have known about before. Science journalists play a really important role here, as you can probably imagine. They go out and find these facts and repackage them in a format that is useful for us to consume. We often think about politics and crime as being the main forms of reporting, I think, but science reporting has become really important, particularly in the pandemic, where we all need to stay up to date on all of the various things that are happening. Science fact checkers are also related to this, which are a little bit different than science journalists in some capacities. This has also become really important in recent years in the fight against misinformation and conspiracy theories. But these types of writers, they go out and debunk these claims. They provide relevant background information or context as to why, given points are being taken out of context, for example. So there are a lot of things going on in misinformation that is beyond the scope of this video, but what will suffice to say is that science fact checkers I think of as almost like a frontline defense against misinformation, and going out on the internet and trying to find these erroneous claims and trying to bring good science where bad science was originally. Persuasion is up next, and to talk about this one, I want to give a particular example. Silent Spring was published in 1960 1962 by Rachel Carson. This book was about the pesticide DDT and the environmental impacts that it had, and attacked some of the claims that the chemical companies were making at that time. The book was incredibly influential. It led to the banning of DDT, the founding of the EPA, and was really a big impact in the early environmental movement. So this is one of the most influential nonfiction books of all time. It's often cited as one of the most influential nonfiction books of all time, or the best nonfiction books of all time, which is really impressive, and because this is all a science book at the end of the day. Now, it's difficult, of course, to imagine a book having quite that level of impact, these days in the current media environment, but it shows that science writing can influence discourse in various ways, and I think that you see that now. Beyond this, we can also change the way people act and target people's habits. There's all sorts of advice content out there on things like dieting and exercise, sleep, mental health, productivity, like you name it, all of this out there. And if you look at those articles, a good percentage of them use scientific facts or scientific stats to back things up and change the way people act. And that is great at the one level, but I should also caution people that not all advice content is a good example of science writing. Many of these writers will take things out of context or cherry pick, pieces of information to prove a given point, or follow up with some ulterior motive or pre-existing way of thinking. That being said, it's not that all advice content is bad. It's just that to be aware of the way in which the scientific data can be used there, because it has this outsized impact in speaking to people's logic and reason, and if it's being mishandled, it can be sort of deceptive. Next, let's talk about inspiration. The world is an infinite source of inspiration, whether it's staring out into the stars or zooming into the chemicals and cells that make up our own bodies. The natural world is amazing in all of these different ways, and it's hard to quantify appreciating that in the way in everyday life, but I think that it's very valuable. And science writers do a very good job of helping us appreciate that beauty and that wonderment in a new way, by adding detail and depth to our understanding of these topics, by adding more context, or going into things with more nuance as well. At its best, this type of writing, I think, is this really interesting marriage between poetry and science, which is really inspiring to me, at least. You can also get a lot of inspiration from the lives of famous scientists. If you look at people like Albert Einstein, Marie Curie, or Alan Turing, these are all amazingly important people in the progress of the 20th century. And by looking into their lives and understanding the events that led up to them becoming scientists, the forces that were acting on them while they were scientists, how they worked, etc., I think that it does a lot to help you understand genius in the scientific method in a greater level of depth, and I find that motivating myself as well. This type of writing also has a secondary purpose that I think is worth pointing out, and that is about promoting science itself in a way. Scientists want to have more funding, more respect, more bright students joining the profession, and one of the things that this type of inspirational writing does is it helps to elevate the status of the field of science. So, and there's nothing wrong with that. Of course, I think that it's important for every field to kind of represent themselves well, so this kind of inspirational content does a really wonderful job of doing that. Finally, let us talk about entertainment. While the world may be inspiring and wonderful and useful in all these various ways, it's also weird and awesome in a variety of ways as well. There's no reason that science writing can't be just enjoyable, and I think that there's a lot of great content out there that's exploring weird, bizarre, and awesome scientific facts in a way that is entertaining. This entertainment also has a secondary purpose of helping writing that has a different objective as well. So like educational content is more memorable when you're using interesting examples. Persuasive content is more persuasive when you have that entertaining hook to it. So if you want people to read your writing, you should try your best to make it entertaining. So that I think applies here as well, of the way in which entertainment can augment any other type of scientific writing. At this point, you might be wondering, how does this make science writing special? Because all of the things that I've listed here are accomplished in other ways as well, in other forms of writing as well. This is a big topic, but we can break it down a little bit by understanding and thinking back to what is science writing. And the question really becomes like, is it a category of writing like autobiographies or romance novels, for example? Is it a topic of writing that you're writing about, or is it a device that is used in writing? I kind of think it's all of the above, which makes it difficult to pin down. It can be used in different ways in different types of writing. And with that, what I would say that kind of addresses across all of these is that science writing helps us understand our world better, and that is a good in and of itself. And it also has this unique power to speak to our reason and our analytical skills. So in that way, we have this urge to sort of agree with the scientific consensus. So sharing that in the writing has that particular grab and power. But beyond that, there's a lot more to get into with it, and I think I'll leave it for another time. But to close things out, I would recommend that you check out the blog post that I wrote that was associated with this article. There are a lot of examples in there of all of the different kinds of writing that I've mentioned here. So you can check those out if you want to see different possibilities. But I will wrap things up. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Hopefully this was interesting, and if it was, please like and subscribe. See y'all another time.